Hello, and in this video we are going to think about the English paragraph, and we're going to think about the structure, we're going to think about some best practices, and we're going to think about some common mistakes that people make. So if you find it's difficult to understand, then feel free to change the speed of the video in the settings, or you can turn on the captions too. So let's think about the English paragraph, and let's think first about the most basic thing, which is how does it look? So let's think about our formatting. So formatting is just a fancy word for how does it look and where do things go? So let's have a look at an example paragraph. Now, don't worry about reading this. This is in Latin because we don't need to think about the words. We just need to think about how it looks. So firstly, the standard thing that we need to do first is to indent. So indenting is we're just going to move that first sentence in a little bit. Now, in different languages, the size of that indent is different. However, in English, typically we use the tab key. So on the left side of your keyboard, you will see a key that says TAB, tab. So you just hit that once, and that is your indent. Now, the good thing about doing an indent like this is that every time you hit enter for a new paragraph, it will automatically indent for you. So that's something that we need at the beginning of every paragraph, a nice indent just moving in. So the idea is it's nice and big, so you can, if you held some writing at arm's length, that you can easily see where each paragraph breaks. And typically, if we are indenting, we do not need to add an extra blank line between each paragraph. We can just simply hit enter and start a new paragraph. The next part about our formatting is the spacing between the lines. So how much space do we have between those lines? And typically, especially for academic writing, we have double spacing. So this is double spacing, and the previous, so this one is single spacing, this one is double spacing. So you can find this in your writing software. We use different writing softwares, but generally you are going to look for something that looks like this. Okay, so some lines with two arrows kind of next to it. And if you hit that, then you can then choose double. And that will give us our double spacing. So we have our paragraph looking good. So now we need to think about the first sentence that we're going to write in our paragraph. And the first sentence is our topic sentence. So generally speaking, the topic sentence is the first sentence. In longer writing, there are situations where it is not the first sentence. However, generally speaking, in one paragraph or short writing assignments, the topic sentence is going to be the first sentence. So general rules for our topic sentences are be clear. Okay, so we're not writing a mystery novel. We're not hiding information. We are clearly telling our reader what this specific paragraph is about. So be specific. So we don't want general statements. We don't want background information. we need a clear sentence about what this paragraph is about. However, be brief. So a common mistake is trying to fit all the paragraph information into one sentence. That's not what we're doing. We're just giving a nice, clear sentence about what this specific paragraph is about. So we don't announce. So by announce, I mean we don't say, I am going to write about ... or I'm going to tell you about, or this paragraph is about. So don't announce, just tell the reader what the specific idea of this paragraph is about. A bit of advice would be to avoid idioms and metaphors. So natural expressions or natural phrases. This can work, and this can be very good in introductions, because the first sentence in the introduction is a hook, and it's supposed to grab your attention, and it's supposed to hook in and grab your reader's interest. However, for topic sentences, we are simply just informing the reader of the content of this particular paragraph. So I'd avoid idioms and metaphors, generally speaking. So starting a body paragraph with, let sleeping dogs lie. It doesn't really tell us anything about the content of the paragraph specifically. So let's have a look at some examples. So we're going to start with some bad examples and then see some improved versions. So for example, health is important to everyone. Well, this is way too general. This could be 1,000 different paragraphs. So let's try something a bit more specific. So most people never think much about their heart until something goes wrong. So this is a lot more specific. We know that the content is going to be about heart problems, and specifically this person's heart problem. Let's have a look at another example. There is more violent crime these days. Well, again, this is very general. This could be 1,000 different paragraphs. So more specific. The number of violent crimes has increased due to cuts in social funding or social programs or something like that. So now we have a much, much better idea of exactly what this paragraph is about. I'm going to tell you about what skills football players need. Well, again, we said before, don't announce, so you don't need to tell us what you're going to write about. Just write about it. So we can replace it with something like, being a top football player requires more than just on-the-pitch skills. Okay, so we know it's going to be about, things like diet and other kind of things, not just physical football skills. So that's our topic sentences. We need one specific sentence at the beginning of a paragraph. It's very clear, and it tells us specifically what this paragraph is about. So now let's think about more bottom-up, more specific problems with our paragraphs. And let's think about numbers. Now, actually, this can be specific to some second languages. This is not a universal mistake. If we look at this paragraph, okay, so I've kept the Latin. Let's focus on the blue sentences here. So I'll give you one moment just to look at it and think what might be a problem with these numbers. So I'd say really there are two problems here. And it's the orange numbers here. Now, we can say this is more of a style choice rather than a grammar choice specifically, although opinions can vary. Generally speaking, we can say that for numbers below 10, we can use the word. So 1 would be ONE, 2 TWO, and so on, up to 9. After 9, we can just use the number. So if we change our sentence from before, so we see now the numbers have changed to the words. However, this one is okay because it's over 10, so we can still use 12 as just the number. So again, this is more style, but it's something definitely to remember. Keep in the back of your mind when you are reading numbers. So let's think about punctuation, how we're connecting some sentences. And again, let's have a look at our blue sentences. Now, again, this depends on your second language. However, if we notice 1 week, 2 months, 2 years, again, we need a space between those. So 1 week, 2 months, 2 years, we need to put spaces between those. And again, we should remember, probably should use the word. So ONE, TWO in these cases. Okay, so spaces between numbers and words. Next, let's think about conjunctions. So how are we connecting our sentences? So let's have a look at our blue sentences again. Okay, so I'll give you a moment just to read it and think about how could we improve the sentences using these conjunctions. So hopefully you can see there is a problem with the connections here using a period or a full stop to divide this information. So one way to tell about how should we use periods, full stops, commas, things like that with our conjunctions is to try reading the sentences out loud and give a pause every time there is a period or a full stop and a half pause every time there is a comma. And if you find that it sounds like you are dividing important connected information, then we really need to connect those just with a comma. Okay, so starting a sentence with a conjunction, you will find lots of examples of this in English. However, really we should be connecting together sentences rather than separating sentences and starting with a conjunction. Another example we can see here. And again, if we read it out loud, it was difficult, but worth doing. Well, it sounds a lot better if we actually combine that information into one sentence. It was difficult, but worth doing. It was difficult, but worth doing. So using those conjunctions, those and, so, but, because kind of words, we should be using that to connect together sentences rather than starting sentences with them. Which brings us to another very important part of writing, which we can call flow. So again, I'm going to give you some sentences. Just take a moment to read them. In fact, try reading them out loud and you will probably find what the problem is with this section. again, if we read these sentences out loud, it feels very start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. Very staccato, if you know the musical term. So there's no grammar problems with these sentences. However, for the reader, it's not a very comfortable read. We're kind of start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. So let's think about combining the sentences like this. So one more time, if you try reading it out loud using the pause ideas, and hopefully you'll find that this actually flows together a lot better. So when we're writing, we've got to think, what information can we combine? Because when we're combining the information, we're showing the relationship between that information. And again, what helps here is reading out loud, that we can feel where the pauses are too often, too frequent. We can feel where it's separating out the information. So you may be thinking, oh, but that last sentence is still a short sentence. Well, there's actually no problems with short sentences. Short sentences can be very good. They can add impact or they can add emphasis. The problem only comes when we have lots of short sentences together. So not only is it very stop, start, stop, start, but we're not really feeling the relationship between the information. It just feels like we are reading a shopping list. So when you're writing, you need to think about this question. How are you connecting the information? How are we using conjunctions like so, but, because, and? How are we using those kind of words to show the relationship between the information or the result of information? And lots of too short sentences, that's not great, but equally lots of very long sentences, equally not so great for the reader. If you're reading long sentences, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the information, or you cannot remember the start of the sentence. So what we need is a good mix of sentence length, but it starts with this idea of how are we showing the relationship of the information. Next, let's think about the language that we're using. So how can we use interesting or more vivid language? So what do we mean by interesting or vivid language? Well, let's have a look at some not so great examples and think about how can we improve it. So she was a bad dog. Okay, well, first we know this is wrong. There are no bad dogs, only good girls and good boys. So in this fantasy world where there is a bad dog, well, bad how? Bad is a very basic word. It's very general. So how can we actually be more specific, use more interesting language to describe this dog? So for example, she was a disobedient dog. Yeah. You tell her to come here, or you throw a ball and she totally ignores you. So maybe that's why she's a bad dog. Or she was a mischievous dog. So she rips up your clothes, she destroys your sofa. So what kind of bad is it? So we're trying to get away from general language to something a bit more specific, a bit more interesting. Okay, but as we know, there are no bad dogs, only good girls and good boys. Here's another example. The man was tall. So, okay, I mean, fair enough. It's not wrong, but it's not particularly vivid or interesting. So how can we give the reader more of an insight into this man. So maybe the man was slender, so we're thinking long and thin. Or maybe the man towered over us. So again, tower gives a feeling of like being so tall that he seems to be over you. It's like a huge building. So again, just more interesting. And we can see here we've actually replaced an adjective with a noun for towered. So again, we can just restructure the sentence, but we're using more interesting language. Let's have one more example. The painting was beautiful. Again, fair enough. It's not wrong, but it's not particularly interesting or vivid. So maybe we can say that the painting was exquisite. So in this case, it was detailed and beautiful. Or maybe the painting was fascinating. Okay, there was something about it that was really drawing you in. It was pulling you in. You couldn't take your eyes off it. Or maybe the painting was alluring. So again, these are a lot more interesting language than just using basic general words. But we must be careful when we are choosing these words. I'm sure the first idea is let's look in the Thesaurus and let's choose a more interesting word. However, be aware that yes, all of these words do kind of mean tall, but they don't mean exactly the same thing. So lanky is not the same as statuesque. And sizable is not the same as great. And towering is not the same as lofty. So when we're choosing a new word, we can't just randomly choose. We can't just open our thesaurus and just randomly pick a word. So don't just randomly pick from the thesaurus. The best way is to look in an English dictionary and just to make sure that nuance is the nuance that you're looking for. Otherwise, you could be insulting something that you are trying to praise or praising something you are trying to insult, overall confusing the reader. And be careful of translating idioms or expressions from your own language. For two reasons. Number one, idioms and expressions are often very culturally based. So they are often very difficult to translate. And number two is if the reader is not from your culture, then it may actually be more confusing than interesting because they don't have the same cultural references. The translation of that expression or that idiom might actually be more confusing than interesting. So I think really think about quality, not quantity. So don't try packing every single sentence with as many vivid words and interesting language as you can find. It's better to choose a few careful words than lots of careless words. Okay, so don't randomly pick them. Avoid translating idioms and expressions from your own language, and quality, not quantity. So let's go back to our previous example. Now, one thing to notice is this is writing about what is quite an important moment in this person's life. However, there's actually not much emotional language or vivid language for something that is clearly a narrative assignment or a narrative piece of writing. There's no feeling that this is very important to this person. And we're using kind of, if we look at the purple words, quite kind of general words. There's nothing so vivid or interesting about it. So let's have a look at the first sentence first. So instead of bad accident, we can use something like life-changing. Okay, so I had a life-changing car accident. Okay, so we know it's bad, but in this case, it's really hitting that this has changed this person. Okay, this was not a little bump. This was a big deal. And injured, okay, well, I mean, injured is an okay word, but we can really make it feel important. We add the word permanently. So I permanently injured my neck. Let's have a look at changing the next part now. So it took me 1 week before I was allowed out of hospital. So again, this kind of vivid language, we're using a passive voice, but we know that it's the doctors that are not allowing this person out of hospital. So it must be serious, right? Maybe they wanted to get out of hospital, but they were so sick or so injured that they could not move, or they were not safe to leave hospital. Okay, so again, before I was allowed out of hospital, it feels more important. And then we're adding in very kind of emotive words like agony. So it took 6 months for the agony to stop, and 2 years to feel normal. Okay, so maybe on the outside they were normal, but the idea that they didn't feel normal when they were at work. So this is really adding to this kind of emotional experience. So the last part of the sentence, so I sometimes feel stabs of pain. Okay, so 2 things. Number 1, it's telling us that it's not a permanent pain this time. It's very quick and very sharp. And also we're using kind of emotional, violent language, like stabs of pain. So not moments of pain or a second of pain, but we're using a word like stab. Okay, so it has that violent feeling to it. Okay, so all of this, we've improved the writing for this narrative piece of writing. Before, it felt like it was simply just giving information, very dry information. But we've added interesting language and vivid language. And what we've done is we've now given it a sense of importance and given it that sense of how it changed this person's life. So we're using, and again, none of these words are particularly difficult, but they are changing the significance of the writing. And again, notice we're not adding in 3 or 4 adjectives in a row. Okay, we're choosing very carefully where we are adding this information. Okay, so again, quality, not quantity. The final section we're talking about in this video, we are going to think about something called register. Now, if you've never heard about this before, probably in school, in your English classes, you probably learned about formal English and casual English. Well, that's what we mean by register. It's the type of language that you use with different people or in a different situation. Now, we can think of these basically in 5 levels. You'll find other versions, but this is one way to look at it. So we have a frozen register, which is basically language that never changes. It's fixed. Okay, so your wedding vows, basically most people's wedding vows are the same, or Miranda rights, what the American police say to people when they are being arrested. It does not change, right? It's memorized and it's fixed. Formal English, sometimes considered standard English. So speeches, lessons in formal situations, so we can perhaps connect that to politeness as well. One that not many people have heard of is consultative. So it's between formal and casual. Then we have casual, which is the language between friends, so using slang, things like that. And then we have intimate, so language between lovers, other close families and friends. Now it says pet names here, so this does not mean the name of your dog or your cat or your rabbit. Pet names is like the name you have for your girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, partner. So if you call them Snuggle Bunny instead of their real name, then that's considered a pet name. Okay, and inside jokes, so jokes between specific groups of people. So this is register, and one common mistake that we find in second language English writing is mixing registers. So if we look at the blue sentence here, what we find is that this sentence is mixing two registers. So we've got, in the purple, we have a more formal register, and in the orange, we have a more casual register. Now, which is correct? Well, that depends on the kind of writing that you're doing. So let's say that this is a more formal piece of English, maybe an academic piece of English. So we could change the orange writing into something more formal. So children and spending time together instead of hanging out. But equally, we could change moreover and consequences. Because the big question is, who is your audience? And who is the reader? So, are you writing a blog? Are you writing an email to a boss? Are you writing an academic article for a medical magazine? Everything about your register choice depends on who your audience is. So casual English could be fine, consultative English could be fine, formal English, even intimate English could be fine. It depends who you are writing to. So when you sit down to write, always think about who is your audience, who is the reader, who's receiving this, therefore, what is the type of English that I'm using? All right, thank you for watching. I hope it was informative.